The kitchen smelled of smothered onions and bell peppers. It was a familiar, soothing scent, one that always reminded me of times when life was simpler and the table was fuller. A time when Benjamin's laughter would boom through the house, when Tavorius, as a little boy, would slide into his chair, his eyes wide with hunger for both the food and the stories of our day. Now I flipped the single pork chop in the skillet, the sizzle a lonely sound in the quiet. The plate waiting on the counter was for one. This was my life, shrunk down to the 4 rooms of the Carriage house, a quaint but detached guest cottage on the grounds of the massive estate I had built with my own husband decades ago. 10 years. It had been 10 years since I signed the thick sheaf of papers, transferring the deed of the main house and the 20-acre property to my son. Benjamin had been gone only 6 months, the cancer having stolen him with a swift, brutal finality. The grief was a physical weight, a leaden cloak I wore every day. "Tavorius," I'd said, my voice still hollow from loss. "You're a man now. You're the head of this family. This house, this land, it's yours. It will broaden your shoulders, make you strong." I had meant it as a gift, a passing of the torch. I saw it as a way to tether my grieving son to something solid and permanent, to give him a purpose. But instead of eagle's wings, the responsibility only seemed to fuel an ever-growing appetite for his new wife Kenyatta's demands. The estate hadn't broadened his shoulders. It had become a crown he wore with a petulant sense of entitlement, while Kenyatta whispered in his ear, shaping his every desire. Now I lived here, in the shadow of the home I designed, trying to be as invisible as the dust motes dancing in the late afternoon sun. I was like an old, ornate sideboard, too sentimental to throw out, but clashing too severely with the new, cold, modern aesthetic they had imposed on my home. The door creaked, a sound I'd been meaning to oil for weeks, and a gust of chilly autumn air rushed in, cutting through the warmth of the kitchen and making the flame on the stove flicker. They entered without knocking, as always. Tavorius, my boy, now a man of 35, his shoulders hunched, his eyes fixed on the intricate pattern of the runner rug I'd brought back from Morocco a lifetime ago. He was fiddling with the mother-of-pearl button on his cashmere blazer, a nervous habit he'd had since childhood. Kenyatta, on the other hand, swept in as if she were making a grand entrance onto a stage. She carried herself with an exaggerated tragedy, her designer dress seeming to wilt on her frame under the imagined burden. She tossed her Burberry trench coat onto my rocking chair without a word of greeting, the fabric smothering the hand-stitched cushion. She sighed, a heavy, world-weary sound that seemed to suck all the oxygen from the room. "Smells good in here, Ma," Tavorius mumbled, finally risking a glance at the stove. "It's just pork chops," I said, keeping my voice carefully neutral, a skill I had perfected over the last few years. "There's plenty if you're hungry. I have some sweet potato pie from yesterday." "We can't stay," Kenyatta interjected, her voice a sharp, precise instrument. She looked around my small kitchen with barely concealed distaste, as if assessing its value for a garage sale. "We have to finalize the packing. The cruise departs tomorrow from Barcelona. The car to the airport comes at 7 sharp. "Oh, that's right," I said, turning back to the skillet to give my hands something to do. "The 2-week Mediterranean cruise? Naples, Mykonos, Dubrovnik, the one you've been talking about for months." I allowed a sliver of genuine warmth into my voice, the last vestiges of a grandmother's hope. "I hope you have a wonderful time," The photos will be beautiful. There was a thick, uncomfortable silence. I could feel the weight of their shared gaze on my back. The silence was a language we had become fluent in, filled with unspoken accusations and my silent endurance. "Mom," Tavorius began, his voice strained, cracking on the single syllable. He cleared his throat. "About the cruise, we sat down with the financial planner last week. We looked at the numbers, really looked at them." I turned slowly, wiping my hands on the checkered apron tied around my waist. "Yes?" I met his eyes, and I saw the boy he was, drowning in the man he had become. Kenyatta stepped forward, placing a hand on Tavorius's arm. A gesture meant to look supportive, but which felt more like a command. Her face was a mask of pained sympathy, but her eyes, the colour of cold slate, remained untouched. "Eleanor," she said, my name sounding like a clinical diagnosis on her lips. "We had every intention of taking you. You must believe that. But the expenses, you have no idea. The mortgage on this place is astronomical. The property taxes alone could fund a small school. And Tavorius's new venture capital firm. It's a very lean season. We had to make some tough choices." She paused, letting the manufactured gravity of the situation hang in the air. "We simply couldn't swing a third ticket. It was just impossible. There's no money. You'll have to stay home." There's no money. The words hung between us, cheap and flimsy as tissue paper. I thought of the brand new, fire engine red Porsche 911 that sat in their 6-car garage. I remembered the diamond tennis bracelet Kenyatta had flashed at me just last week. A little something Tavorius picked up for my birthday. I pictured the constant, silent parade of delivery trucks, the boxes from Neiman Marcus and Bergdorf Goodman that were carried into the main house. I thought of the empire my Benjamin and I had built from a single, run-down duplex we renovated ourselves. Bello Global, a name now whispered with respect in shipping and real estate circles. I felt a strange calm settle over me. It was not the calm of defeat, but the calm of a chess player who has seen the end game for many moves, and now watches her opponent, finally, foolishly, walk into the final trap. I smiled, a gentle, accepting curve of my lips that did not reach my eyes. "All right," I said softly. The word seemed to suck all the sound from the room. They both blinked, startled by its simplicity, by the lack of fight. They had braced for an argument, for tears, for guilt. They were armed for a battle, and I had offered a surrender they never expected. Kenyatta recovered first, a flicker of triumph igniting in those cold eyes before she banked it. "Well, good. I'm glad you understand. It's just the reality of things," she said, her voice regaining its brisk efficiency. "We'll bring you back a nice souvenir. A little trinket from Portofino, perhaps." They left as quickly as they had come, the door clicking shut behind them, sealing me back into my silence. The chill from their entrance still lingered, a metaphysical cold that had little to do with the autumn air. I stood there in my quiet kitchen, the pork chop now burning, filling the air with the acrid scent of ruined dinner and broken promises. "All right," I whispered again to the empty room. But this time, my smile was different. It was not the smile of a resigned old woman. It was the sharp, knowing smile of Eleanor Bello, co-founder and silent majority shareholder of Bello Global. It was the smile of a woman who had just watched the final piece of a long-planned strategy fall perfectly into place. The test had been given. They had failed. Spectacularly. And now, it was time for their final exam. The smell of burning pork chop faded, replaced by the ghost of a different scent. Sawdust, sweat, and Benjamin's cheap, spicy cologne. The memory washed over me, so vivid it was like stepping through a tear in time. It was the summer of 1985. The air in Atlanta was thick enough to drink, humming with cicadas and ambition. We were standing in the shell of a dilapidated bungalow in West End, our first project. Plaster dust coated our skin and clothes, making us look like ghosts haunting our own future. "Look at this place, Ellie," Benjamin said, his voice full of wonder as he ran a hand over an exposed brick wall, crumbling in places, but solid at its heart. "Good bones. Just like us." We were 24, armed with nothing but a small insurance payout from his father's passing and a bottomless well of determination. We bought the worst house on a block that was just beginning to dream of being better. For 6 months, we were our own general contractors, carpenters, and janitors. I learned to hang drywall. Benjamin, an engineer by trade, rewired the entire house, his brow furrowed in concentration. At night, our bodies aching, we would lie on a mattress in the empty living room, surrounded by blueprints lit by a single bare bulb. We dreamed aloud, not just of a house, but of an empire. "Bello Properties," he'd say, his arm around me. "It has a nice ring to it. Sounds strong." "Bello Global," I'd counter, tracing patterns on his chest. "Because we're not going to stop here." We didn't. That first flip gave us a profit that we rolled into a 2-family home, then a small apartment building. Benjamin had the vision for structural integrity, for seeing the potential in a sagging beam. I had the eye for design and the gut for finance, for knowing which neighborhoods were poised to bloom. We were a perfect partnership. When Tavorius was born, the blueprints on our bed were joined by baby blankets. We built Bello Global not just for us, but for him, for his future. We wanted to give him the world, but we were determined he would know its value. We made him work summers on the construction sites, not as punishment, but as education. He needed to understand that marble countertops didn't magically appear. They were measured, cut, and installed by hands that ached at the end of the day. The memory dissolved, leaving me back in the silent carriage house. I looked out the small window over the sink. The main house, Bello Manor, stood silhouetted against the twilight, a monument to our success. We had designed every inch of it, the wraparound porch for summer evenings, the chef's kitchen for large family gatherings, the library with its floor-to-ceiling shelves for Benjamin's books. Now its lights were on, but it felt dark to me. Kenyatta had stripped it of our personal history, replacing our collected art with sterile, expensive prints, our warm colours with shades of grey and white. My phone, a simple flip model that made Tavorius scoff, buzzed on the counter. I knew who it was before I answered. "James." "Mrs. Eleanor." His calm, familiar voice came down the line. James had been with us for 30 years, starting as a driver and becoming so much more. A confidant, a protector, the keeper of our secrets. I take it the conversation occurred? It did, just as we anticipated. There's no money, James. I could almost hear his grim smile. A tragic miscalculation. The jet is prepped and waiting at the private terminal. Your luggage is already aboard. Captain Anders confirms the Siren's Song will be docked adjacent to the Ocean Radiance as requested. He is eager to have the owner back on board. Thank you, James. I'll be ready at dawn. I ended the call. The Siren's Song. My sanctuary. My secret. After I signed over the estate, a deep, primal instinct told me to protect the heart of our empire, the company itself. With the help of Charles, our ancient, fiercely loyal family lawyer, we restructured Bello Global. On paper, I was a retired minority shareholder. In reality, through a Byzantine network of trusts and holding companies headquartered in Luxembourg, I retained 72% controlling interest. Tavorius, so focused on the tangible asset of the house, never asked the right questions. He received a generous salary as a consultant, which he and Kenyatta burned through with staggering speed. The Siren's Song was my first major purchase as the silent owner. It was my declaration of independence, a floating fortress that was entirely mine. Tavorius knew of the yacht, of course. It was famous in certain circles. He'd once mentioned it over dinner, his voice full of covetous awe. Can you imagine, Ken, the Siren's Song, owned by some reclusive billionaire? That's the life. If he had only looked closer, he would have seen the flicker in my eyes. That night, I didn't sleep. I packed a single elegant suitcase with clothes that Kenyatta would have deemed too simple, but were in fact crafted by designers whose names she wouldn't even recognize. As the first hint of light touched the horizon, I saw the black car pull up for them. I watched from the shadows as Tavorius loaded their obscene amount of luggage, as Kenyatta stood checking her reflection in her phone, as they drove away without a backward glance toward the carriage house. The moment their car disappeared, James arrived in the Rolls-Royce. "Madam," he said, opening the door for me with the same reverence he had always shown. The drive to the private terminal was smooth and silent. There were no lines, no security pat-downs. I was escorted directly onto the Bello Global Gulfstream G650. As the jet soared over the Atlantic, I sipped orange juice and looked down at the clouds. I wasn't fleeing my life. I was reclaiming it. Barcelona was a blur of sunshine and efficient service. A tender was waiting to whisk me to the Siren's Song. And what a sight she was. Long, sleek, and devastatingly beautiful, her white hull gleaming, her lines speaking of speed and power. She made the Ocean Radiance, docked beside her, look like a clumsy, overgrown floating hotel. The crew, lined up on deck, welcomed me with respectful bows. "Welcome home, Madam Owner," Captain Anders said, his Nordic features breaking into a rare, genuine smile. He was a man of few words and unwavering loyalty, another recruit I had personally vetted. "It's good to be home, Captain. The stage is set?" "Perfectly. Their ship boards at 2 p.m. I've reserved your usual table at the Veranda Cafe for 1:45. You'll have an unparalleled view." And so, as the passengers for the Ocean Radiance began to stream up the gangway in a chaotic, sun-hatted herd, I was seated at my table. A crisp linen cloth, a single orchid in a vase, a perfect cappuccino placed before me by a steward who knew not to speak unless spoken to. I felt a profound peace. This was my world. I saw them before they saw me. Kenyatta, in a dramatic, wide-brimmed red hat, and Tavorius, already looking stressed as he tried to manage their luggage. They stopped, as everyone did, to gawk at the siren song. Kenyatta immediately began taking selfies, angling the camera to make it look like the yacht was hers. Then, Tavorius's gaze, sweeping the crowd, passed over the cafe, snapped back, and locked onto me. The transformation was slow, then instantaneous. Confusion, then disbelief, then dawning, horrified comprehension. Kenyatta, seeing his face, followed his stare. Her phone, a brand new diamond-encrusted thing, slipped from her fingers and clattered on the deck. The sound seemed to break their paralysis. They moved like a storm, pushing past other passengers, their faces contorted. They burst through the discreet gate, separating the ship's public deck from the private veranda of the cafe. "Mother?" Tavorius's voice was a strangled thing. "What in God's name? How did you get here? Are you stalking us?" Kenyatta found her voice, and it was a shriek that turned heads across the water. "You followed us! You pathetic, crazy woman! How dare you! You spent your grocery money on a ticket to harass us? Security! Security!" I took a slow, deliberate sip of my cappuccino. The foam was perfect. "I'm not on your ship, Kenyatta," I said, my voice calm, carrying easily in the space between us. "I'm simply enjoying my coffee." "Your coffee? On a ship like this? Don't be absurd!" Tavorius hissed, leaning in close, his face a mask of fury and embarrassment. "Did you steal a ticket? Use some pathetic senior discount? This is insane. You're humiliating us." It was then that Captain Anders arrived. He didn't stride. He manifested. His presence was an immediate quietus. The other passengers watching fell silent. "Is there a problem, Madam Owner?" he asked, his voice a low, authoritative rumble that was meant only for me, but was heard by all. Madam Owner. The words hung in the air, not yet processed. Tavorius, emboldened by what he saw as a rescuer, puffed out his chest. "Captain, thank goodness. This woman is harassing us. She's my mother. She's clearly unwell and confused. She must have snuck on board. I demand you have her removed immediately and returned to shore." Captain Anders turned his glacial blue eyes on my son. He didn't speak for a long, painful moment, letting Tavorius's demand hang in the air, absurd and fragile. "Mr. Bello," he said, his voice dropping another octave, cold and precise. "You are mistaken. This is not the Ocean Radiance. You are currently trespassing on the private veranda of the MS Siren's Song. And this," he said, turning to me and executing a slight, formal bow, "is Mrs. Eleanor Bello, the sole owner of this vessel, and the majority shareholder and chief executive officer of Bello Global. You are shouting at your employer on her private property." The world stopped. I watched the words hit them like physical blows. Tavorius's face went from red to a sickly, ghostly white. His jaw unhinged. His eyes bulged, scrambling to process the impossible. Sole owner, Bello Global, CEO. Kenyatta made a small, gurgling sound in the back of her throat. The hand that had been pointing a trembling finger at me flew to her mouth, her eyes, wide with horror, darted from the captain's stern face to my calm one, to the overwhelming luxury of the yacht surrounding us, and finally to the realization of their catastrophic error. Their legs, as if the bones within had instantly dissolved, could no longer hold them. It wasn't a graceful swoon or a deliberate kneel. It was a collapse. Tavorius fell first, his knees hitting the polished teak deck with a sickening thud. Kenyatta followed, a marionette with her strings cut, her beautiful red hat tumbling from her head. Owner? Tavorius stammered, the word a foreign, impossible concept. Below Global? But that's a rival firm. You signed everything over to me. I placed my cup back on its saucer. The gentle clink was the only sound for miles. I signed over the estate, Tavorius. The house, the land, the things you and Kenyatta were so desperate to possess. I never signed over my company. Your father and I built Below Global with our blood and tears. Did you truly think I would hand over our life's work to a son who would let his wife relegate his mother to a servant's quarters? Kenyatta was crying now, silent, heaving sobs of utter shame and terror. You played us, she whispered, the truth dawning. This was all a test. It was an observation, I corrected her, my voice steady, though my heart ached for the son I had lost to his own greed. And you failed it the moment you told me there's no money. You failed it every time you walked through that big house and left me to eat alone in the small one. You failed it by believing the matriarch of this family was a feeble old woman to be pitied and parked out of sight. I stood up, looking down at them where they knelt, broken and small on the deck. They were no longer threats, just a profound disappointment. Captain, I said, please escort these two back to their ship. Their cruise is waiting. Mother, please, Tavorius cried out, his voice cracking with a desperation I had never heard before. He reached for my hem, but I took a subtle step back. I'm sorry. We didn't know. We would never. That, I said, my final word on the matter, is the problem. You never thought to ask. You never thought to see me as anything more than a burden. Now, you have a life you built with the resources I gave you. And I said, turning my back on them to face the endless blue sea, have a company to run. I heard their choked sobs, their pleading, their world collapsing behind me, but I didn't look back. Captain Anders and two stewards gently but firmly guided them away. I walked to the railing of my ship, the siren's song. The sun was warm on my face, the sea breeze a gentle caress. In the distance, I heard the horn of the ocean radiance blare, signaling its departure. I was no longer the invisible woman in the carriage house. I was Eleanor Bello, the architect, the owner, the storm. And I was, finally, free. The silence they left behind was more profound than any I had known in the carriage house. It was a silence of victory, of a battle ended not with a shout, but with a whisper. A steward quietly cleared my coffee cup. The gentle hum of the ship's systems, the distant cry of a gull. These were the only sounds. Peace. It was short-lived. Madam. Captain Anders had returned, his face unreadable. They are back on the ocean radiance. However, Mr. Bello was insistent. He demanded to speak with you. He said it was a matter of extreme urgency. I sighed, the weight of motherhood even now pulling at me. Let him stew, Captain. For now, I'd like to review the shipping manifests for the Q4 acquisitions. My office? Of course. My office on the Siren Song was not a mere room. It was a command center. Floor-to-ceiling screens showed real-time shipping data, stock tickers, and security feeds from Bello global offices worldwide. Here, I wasn't a grandmother. I was a general. For the next few hours, I lost myself in the familiar language of logistics and finance. It was a balm. Meanwhile, I could only imagine the scene on the neighboring ship. Tavorius and Kenyatta, in their expensive suite, surrounded by the trappings of a luxury they now understood was funded by the very woman they had exiled. The souvenir Kenyatta had promised me would now taste like ash. My private line buzzed. It was James. "Mrs. Eleanor, I have Mr. Charles on the line for you. He says it's pressing." Charles, my lawyer. My heart gave a little lurch. "Patch him through, James." "Eleanor." Charles's voice, dry as parchment, came on the line. "I've just received a rather hysterical call from Tavorius. He's threatening legal action. Claims you've defrauded him, that you've been operating the company under false pretenses." I almost laughed. "On what grounds? He never owned a single share. The trust documents are ironclad, Charles. You made sure of that." "They are. But a lawsuit, however frivolous, could create bad press. He's also making noises about an emergency injunction to freeze assets." This was the son I raised. Instead of introspection or apology, his first instinct was to lash out, to sue. The hurt was a fresh, sharp sting. "Let him try," I said, my voice cold. "Initiate Protocol Aries." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Eleanor, are you sure? That's the nuclear option." "He just launched the first missile, Charles. I'm activating the defense system." "Do it." Protocol Aries was something Charles and I had devised in secret. It was a series of legal and financial maneuvers that would, within hours, sever Tavorius completely from the Bello ecosystem. It would freeze the generous consultancy payments, revoke his access to all corporate accounts, and send a formal notice of eviction from the estate, which was, as it turned out, still held in a trust I controlled, a clause Tavorius had glossed over in his eagerness to possess it. The son who had told me, "There's no money," was about to find out exactly what that felt like. The next day, the siren song and the ocean radiance were both docked in the stunning port of Mykonos. Whitewashed buildings tumbled down hillsides toward the impossibly blue sea. I decided to go ashore for a quiet lunch at a small, family-owned taverna I favoured, tucked away from the tourist crowds. James arranged for a discreet security detail to follow at a distance. I was enjoying a simple salad of tomatoes and feta, the sun on my shoulders, when I heard the familiar, shrill voice. "I don't care what the website says. There must be a table. Do you know who I am?" Kenyatta. She and Tavorius were at the entrance of the taverna, being politely but firmly turned away by the owner. They looked ragged, their expensive clothes rumpled, their eyes shadowed with sleeplessness and panic. The facade had cracked completely. Their eyes met mine across the terrace. The anger in Tavorius's face was molten. He strode over, Kenyatta trailing behind him like a tattered ghost. "You," he seethed, ignoring the other diners. "You froze my accounts. You're having us evicted." "I'm restructuring the family assets," I said calmly, taking a sip of my mineral water. "You claimed there was no money. I'm simply making that a reality for you, so you can fully understand the situation you described to me." "You can't do this. I'll fight you. I'll tell the world what a manipulative, heartless witch you are." "Be careful, Tavorius," I said, my voice dropping to a whisper, that carried more threat than his shout. You are talking to the majority shareholder of a multi-billion-dollar corporation. The world tends to believe us over disgruntled former dependents. The word dependent hit him like a slap. Kenyatta found her voice, a broken, pleading thing. Eleanor, please. We're sorry. We were blind. We were stupid. Tavorius is your son, your only child. Please, don't do this to us. I looked at her, then at my son. I saw the little boy who used to bring me dandelions. I saw the man he could have been, and I saw the stranger he had become. The carriage house is available, I said finally. It's small, but it's paid for. You can stay there while you reassess your lives. The indignity of the offer was a fresh shock. The thought of them living in the very cottage they had banished me to was a poetic justice so perfect it was almost cruel. Tavorius's face crumpled. Not in anger, but in a final, devastating defeat. He wasn't facing a mother anymore. He was facing a CEO. And he had just been fired from the job of being my son. He didn't say another word. He turned and walked away. His shoulders slumped in a way I had never seen before. Kenyatta stared at me for one last, desperate moment before scurrying after him. I finished my lunch. The tomatoes were sweet, the feta tangy. The sun was still warm. The world, for the first time in a long time, felt perfectly in order. I had given him everything, and in taking it all away, I had given him the one thing I never could before: the truth. And myself, the most precious gift of all: my freedom. The siren's song would sail on, and I would be at its helm, not as a ghost, not as a memory, but as Eleanor Bello, whole, complete, and finally, unequivocally, seen. And that, my friends, is the full story of Eleanor Bello. A powerful reminder that respect and love for family should always come before greed and status. Never underestimate the quiet strength of those you perceive as weak, for they often hold the greatest power. If this story of resilience and redemption resonated with you, if it made you smile or think, then do us a huge favor. Smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit that notification bell for more powerful, heartwarming, and viral stories like this one. Let us know in the comments below. Which city are you listening from today? We love connecting with our global family. Your support means the world. It helps us keep the lights on and the stories coming. Share this video with a friend who needs to hear a story about standing up for themselves. Until next time, remember, your greatest revenge is to live well.